The colony of Vesper 7 had always been peaceful. It was a quiet human settlement on the edge of explored space, far from wars and conflict. The people there built homes, planted crops, and raised their children under the twin suns of the planet. But peace is a fragile thing. It started with a scream. A young boy named Daniel Carter, no older than 7, had been playing near the outer fields when a black shadow descended from the sky. The people of Vesper 7 saw it too late. A Rizari cartel skiff, sleek and cruel, hovered low, its engines roaring like a beast searching for prey. The Rizari were known across the galaxy as mercenaries, slavers, and killers. They had no love for humans. By the time Daniel's mother ran to him, it was too late. The Rizari grabbed him, dragging him toward their ship. The colony's alarm blared, but the settlers had no real weapons, no soldiers, only farmers, workers, and traders. A few brave men tried to fight back, but the Rizari only laughed, their reptilian faces twisting in amusement. Then one of them struck the boy. A sharp crack echoed as Daniel's body hit the ground. Blood stained the dirt. The settlers froze, horror in their eyes. The Rizari scoffed, tossing the boy aside like trash before lifting off into the sky. They did not know what they had just done. On the other side of the colony, Elias Kane stood in his home, staring at the sky. He was a quiet man, a retired soldier who had come to Vesper 7 to escape his past. His days of war were over, or so he thought. He had seen enough death, enough bloodshed. But as he watched the Rizari ship vanish into the clouds, something inside him snapped. When the news reached him, he didn't speak. He didn't cry. He simply turned, walked into his house, and opened a hidden compartment beneath the floor. Inside lay a set of weapons. They were old, but deadly, memories of a past life he had tried to bury. He picked up a combat knife, testing its edge. Still sharp. The settlers gathered at the town square, mourning Daniel, speaking of revenge, but none had the power to fight. None but one man. Kane stepped forward. His voice was calm, but there was fire in his eyes. Where did they go? The people looked at him, unsure, but one man, a trader who had once visited the Rizari black markets, stepped forward. They'll be on Dalvuth Prime. That's where they take people. Kane nodded. He had heard of Dalvuth Prime, a lawless planet where criminals ruled. It was a place where no decent man survived. But Kane was no decent man. He picked up a rifle, strapped on a vest, and turned toward the stars. Elias Kane moved with calm precision. He packed only what he needed: weapons, rations, and a small data chip containing old contacts from his past. His face was emotionless, but inside, a storm was brewing. The people of Vesper 7 watched in silence as he prepared his ship. Some whispered, "He's going after them." Others said, "It's suicide." No one tried to stop him. At the edge of the landing bay, an old friend approached. Marcus Hale, a former smuggler turned farmer, stood with arms crossed. "You're really doing this?" Marcus asked. Kane tightened his belt, securing a combat knife at his side. "They took a child. They killed him. You know what that means." Marcus sighed, shaking his head. "Yeah, I do. The Rizari don't leave loose ends. If they know you're coming, they'll be ready." Kane's voice was like steel. "Let them be ready." Marcus hesitated, then pulled something from his jacket. A small data pad. "This has a few codes. Might help you get into Dalvuth Prime without getting shot down." Kane took it without a word, his eyes filled with silent gratitude. A lone ship in the darkness. The nightfall. Kane's old but reliable ship lifted off from Vesper 7, its engines roaring through the quiet night. The moment he entered hyperspace, he checked his weapons. A modified pulse rifle, a sidearm, a combat knife. It wasn't much, but Kane had never needed much. As the ship hummed around him, Kane stared at a small photo attached to the dashboard, a picture of him and his wife from years ago. She had died in the Earth-Saloth War. leaving him with nothing but memories. And now, another innocent life had been taken. Kane closed his eyes for a brief moment. Then he did something he had not done in years. He made a promise. "Daniel, I swear on my life, they'll pay." His hands gripped the controls, and with a sudden burst of speed, the ship shot toward Dalvith Prime, the heart of crime and cruelty in the galaxy. Arrival at Dalvith Prime. Dalvith Prime was not a planet. It was a rotting corpse of civilization, a world covered in black markets, gang hideouts, and slave pits. Ships came and went, smuggling illegal goods, weapons, and stolen lives. Kane piloted the Nightfall through the thick, polluted atmosphere. He transmitted the stolen codes Marcus had given him. The spaceport controllers barely looked at his ship before clearing him for landing. To them, he was just another traveler. Good. The moment he stepped off the ship, the air hit him, a foul mix of smoke, metal, and desperation. Kane scanned the area. He needed information. He needed to find the Rizeri cartel's base. There was only one way to start. He headed straight for the nearest cantina, where criminals gathered. It was time to make them talk. The cantina was a dark, filthy place, filled with the worst kind of criminals. The air smelled of burnt fuel, cheap liquor, and sweat. Alien thugs, bounty hunters, and black market dealers filled the booths, talking in hushed voices. Dalvith Prime was a hive of scum, and Kane was the predator among them. He walked in, calm and steady, his eyes scanning the room. He wasn't here to drink. He was here to find the Rizeri cartel. At the back of the cantina, a fat, four-armed alien sat counting credits. He was a Traxian, a species known for dealing in information. Kane approached. The Traxian barely looked up. "Unless you have credits, human, I have no business with you." Kane didn't reply. Instead, he pulled out a small device and placed it on the table. With a single press, the device let out a high-pitched hum, disrupting every communicator and data chip in the room. The Traxian's eyes widened. "What are you doing?" Kane leaned in. His voice was cold, controlled. "The Rizeri cartel. I need to know where they are." The Traxian hesitated. I don't know what you're talking about." Kane sighed. "Wrong answer." With a lightning-fast move, Kane grabbed the Traxian's arm and twisted it backward, slamming his face onto the table. The alien screamed, drawing the attention of the entire cantina. "Try again," Kane said, his grip tightening. The Traxian gasped. Okay. They have a base in the lower city, a warehouse near the old docking yards. Please, let me go." Kane released him, grabbed his device, and walked away. The rest of the cantina watched in silence. Some whispered. Others stayed out of his way. The human was dangerous. Into the Rizeri's den. The lower city was worse than the cantina. Rusted buildings, flickering neon signs, and alleys filled with shadows and death. Kane moved unseen, slipping between buildings, watching the warehouse from a distance. Rizeri guards stood outside, armed and laughing, unaware of the storm about to hit them. Kane reached into his bag, pulled out a small EMP grenade, and tossed it toward the guards. Boom! The blast sent a pulse of energy, knocking out lights, cameras, and weapons. Before the guards could react, Kane was already inside the warehouse, moving like a shadow. Inside, he saw crates of stolen weapons, supplies, and cages. His jaw clenched. Inside the cages were slaves, humans, and aliens alike. Rage burned in his chest. Then he saw a Rizeri officer, a tall, armored alien barking orders. Kane raised his rifle. The hunt had begun. The warehouse was dark and silent, except for the faint hum of power generators. The stink of metal, sweat, and fear filled the air. Kane moved between the crates and shadows, his pulse rifle held steady. The Rizeri officer, a tall, armored alien with cold reptilian eyes, stood near a console, checking shipment records. He had no idea death was coming for him. Kane crept closer, his knife in hand. He could hear the muffled cries of prisoners locked in cages. Humans, aliens, children. Rage boiled in his veins, but he kept his emotions controlled. Emotions didn't win battles. Strategy did. The moment the officer turned, Kane struck. A single, silent slash, the blade cutting across the Risari's throat. The alien gasped, clawing at his neck, but no sound came out. Kane caught his body before it hit the floor. One down, more to go. The first shot. Kane took the officer's data pad and scanned through it. Names, locations, cartel supply routes, everything he needed. Then he heard footsteps. More guards coming. He grabbed a small shock grenade from his belt, pulled the pin, and rolled it across the floor. VZZZT. A flash of blue light filled the room as the grenade exploded. The guards collapsed, convulsing from the electric surge. Kane stepped over them and fired 2 precise shots, one in each head. He was not here to show mercy. The prisoner's hope. Kane rushed toward the cages, his eyes scanning the terrified faces inside. A young human girl, no older than 10, clung to the bars. Her eyes were wide with fear. Please, help us." Kane knelt, pulling a hacking tool from his belt. He placed it against the lock, and within seconds, the doors clicked open. "Stay behind me," he ordered. "We're getting out of here." The prisoners hesitated. They had lost hope long ago. But then they saw it, a human fighting for them, a human willing to burn the cartel to the ground. And they followed. The cartel strikes back. As they moved toward the exit, an alarm blared. Red lights flashed. The Risari knew something was wrong. Suddenly, the warehouse doors burst open, and a squad of heavily armed Risari enforcers stormed in. One of them sneered, raising his blaster. "The lone human. You should have stayed on your weak little colony." Kane didn't reply. He raised his rifle and fired first. Boom, boom, boom. A gunfight erupted. The slaves screamed and ducked for cover. Kane moved fast, weaving between crates, taking out guards one by one. Headshots. Precision. No wasted bullets. One guard tried to charge him with a blade. Kane simply sidestepped and drove his own knife into the alien's ribs. More were coming. He had to get the prisoners out now. Kane grabbed a detonator from his belt and pressed the trigger. Outside, a massive explosion rocked the docks. The entire warehouse shook. The time for stealth was over. Now, it was all-out war. The explosion shook the entire warehouse. The walls trembled, and dust rained from the ceiling. The slaves screamed, covering their heads as flames roared outside. Kane didn't flinch. This was the distraction he needed. The Risari enforcers staggered, momentarily blinded by the explosion. Kane took advantage of their confusion. Boom, boom. 2 precise shots, 2 guards down. He moved quickly, reloading as he sprinted toward the prisoners. "Move. Stay low. Stay behind me," Kane ordered. The slaves obeyed, fear in their eyes, but hope burning alongside it. The gauntlet. The only way out was through the loading bay, now crawling with Risari reinforcements. They had seen the explosion and were waiting, weapons raised, forming a kill zone. One of the slaves, a wounded Zalarian male, whispered in terror, "We're trapped." Kane ignored the panic. His mind worked like a machine, calculating. Trapped? No. Outnumbered? Yes. But outgunned? Never. He spotted a forklift loaded with fuel canisters. Perfect. Kane took one shot at the canisters. Boom. A second explosion erupted, sending fire and shrapnel through the air. The Risari dived for cover. Kane didn't stop. He led the prisoners through the smoke, using the chaos to weave between crates and debris. A guard jumped out of hiding, raising his rifle. Kane was faster. He grabbed a metal pipe from the ground and swung it hard, crushing the alien's head. No hesitation. No mercy. The dockyard chase. They reached the open dockyard, where ships were lined up for transport. Kane's eyes locked onto a freight shuttle nearby. Their way out. But more Resari patrols were closing in. "Get on the ship," Kane barked. The prisoners ran toward the shuttle while Kane turned to face the enemy. He raised his rifle, dropping 3 more with quick shots. A sniper from the rooftop aimed at Kane's head. Kane rolled behind a crate, feeling the shot whiz past his ear. He was running out of time. The final stand. The Resari surrounded him. Their leader, a tall brute with scurred scales, stepped forward, smirking. "You think one human can stop the cartel?" The alien sneered. Kane slowly raised his hands, then pressed a button on his wristband. The ship's engines roared to life. The Resari turned toward the noise. That was their mistake. Kane lunged, grabbing the leader's own pistol and firing into his gut. The alien collapsed, gasping. Before the rest could react, Kane sprinted toward the shuttle ramp. Bullets flew past him. He jumped, barely making it inside as the doors sealed shut. The ship blasted off, leaving the burning warehouse behind. Kane slumped against the wall, covered in blood and smoke, breathing heavily. One of the freed slaves whispered, You saved us." Kane wiped sweat from his brow and muttered. The freight shuttle rocketed into the sky, leaving the burning warehouse behind. The freed prisoners huddled together, their faces filled with fear and exhaustion. Some were injured, some still in shock, but they were alive. Kane stood at the front of the cockpit, gripping the controls. His mission wasn't over yet. A young human girl, the same one he had freed from the cage, tugged at his sleeve. "Where are we going?" she asked softly. Kane didn't take his eyes off the console. Somewhere safe. But deep inside, he knew there was no safe place yet. The Resari's response, a loud beeping sound, filled the cockpit. Kane's eyes narrowed. The radar flashed red. Multiple signals incoming. Damn it. The Resari cartel wasn't going to let them escape so easily. 3 attack ships were closing in fast. The comms crackled to life. A deep, snarling voice spoke. "You made a mistake, human. Return the cargo, and we might let you live." Cargo. That's what they called these people. Nothing more than property to be bought and sold. Kane's grip on the controls tightened. His voice was cold, unforgiving. "Come and take them." The comms went silent. Then, the enemy ships opened fire. The battle in the void. Kane jerked the controls, dodging the first wave of plasma blasts. The shuttle shook violently as shots skimmed the hull. He needed to act fast. This was not a combat ship. It had no weapons and weak shields. But Kane didn't need firepower. He needed strategy. He scanned the radar and saw a nearby asteroid field. Perfect. He turned the ship sharply, heading straight toward the massive floating rocks. The passengers screamed, gripping their seats as the shuttle dove into the asteroid belt. The Resari ships followed. The hunter turns the trap. Inside the asteroid field, the fight became a deadly game of skill. Kane weaved between the massive, tumbling rocks, using them as cover. The Resari pilots were fast, but not careful. One ship miscalculated and slammed into a large asteroid, exploding on impact. 2 left. Kane kept flying, his hands steady, eyes sharp. He saw another opportunity, a narrow gap between 2 fast-moving asteroids. He pushed the engines to full power, slipping through at the last second. The second enemy ship wasn't so lucky. It collided with one of the asteroids, breaking apart in a fiery explosion. 1 left. The final Resari pilot hesitated. Kane could almost feel the alien's fear through the radio silence. Kane smirked. Run. And the last ship did exactly that, retreating back toward Delveth Prime. The aftermath. The shuttle finally cleared the asteroid field, and everything went quiet. The passengers exhaled in relief, their fear slowly turning into hope. A wounded Zalarian male looked at Kane, respect in his eyes. "You just took on the cartel, and won." Kane didn't look away from the stars. He knew this wasn't over. The Rizari would not forget. He checked the ship's fuel levels. They needed a place to land. Fast. Kane set a course for Vesper 7. He wasn't running. He was preparing for war. The freight shuttle cruised through the darkness of space, heading toward Vesper 7. The battle was over, but Kane knew the real fight was coming. The Rizari cartel had suffered a humiliating defeat, and they wouldn't let it go. Kane leaned back in the pilot's seat, his mind racing. How long until they send more ships? How long until they bring their full force to Vesper 7? A soft voice broke his thoughts. "Mister, are we really safe now?" Kane turned. The young human girl he had rescued stood there, her eyes filled with uncertainty. She had seen horrors no child should ever witness. He sighed. For now. She hesitated, then whispered, "Thank you." Kane nodded but said nothing. He wasn't a hero. He was just doing what had to be done. Vesper 7, a bitter return. As the ship entered Vesper 7's atmosphere, the colony's people gathered, watching in shock. The landing gear hissed as the shuttle touched the ground. The freed prisoners slowly stepped out, blinking at the sunlight. Families ran forward, cries of joy and relief filling the air as loved ones were reunited. But the happiness didn't reach Kane. He saw Marcus Hale pushing through the crowd, his face grim. "You made it back," Marcus said, arms crossed. "But I know that look, Kane. You're not celebrating." Kane's voice was flat, cold. "The Rizari will come." Marcus clenched his jaw. "How bad?" "Bad." Kane looked around at the settlers. "We need to prepare." Marcus exhaled sharply. "Damn it, Kane. We're farmers, not soldiers." Kane's eyes hardened. "Then you better learn fast." A town prepares for war. Within an hour, the colony turned into a battlefield. The farmers were armed with whatever weapons they had, old hunting rifles, modified tools, even sharpened metal rods. Kane set up defensive positions, teaching the settlers how to fight, how to take cover, how to survive. Marcus and a few others set up booby traps, tripwires, explosive barrels, anything to slow the enemy down. The people of Vesper 7 were not warriors. But now, they had no choice but to fight. The warning. As the sun dipped below the horizon, a message came through the colony's main transmitter. A deep, growling voice filled the speakers. "Human, you should have left well enough alone." Kane's eyes narrowed. He recognized that voice. Vash Carrix, the Rizari warlord leading the cartel. "You think you've won. You've only delayed the inevitable." Static crackled, then Vash Carrix continued. "At dawn, we arrive, and when we do, we will burn your colony to the ground." The transmission ended. Silence followed. Kane exhaled slowly, then turned to the people of Vesper 7. "Get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow, we make our stand." The final battle was coming. The night before the battle, the air in Vesper 7 was thick with tension. Everyone knew what was coming. The settlers had prepared as best they could, but they were still a group of farmers, not soldiers. There was no turning back now. Kane walked through the colony, his boots crunching on the dirt roads. The glow of the twin suns was fading behind the hills, casting long shadows across the land. The people were gathered in small groups, some praying, others checking their weapons, trying to stay calm. As he walked, the young girl who had thanked him earlier stepped up. "Are we really going to fight them?" Her voice trembled, but there was something else, a quiet strength. Kane looked down at her. He had seen that look before, the kind of look that comes when someone is forced to grow up too quickly. He knelt down, his voice soft but firm. "We don't have a choice." She nodded, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and determination. "Will we win?" Kane didn't answer right away. He didn't know. The odds were against them, and even he wasn't sure they could hold off the Rizari cartel. But there was one thing he knew for sure. He would make sure they fought with everything they had. "We will fight," he said finally. "And that's all we need to do." Dawn of war. As the first light of dawn broke over Vesper 7, the ground shook. The Rizari fleet had arrived. Ships hovered over the colony, blocking out the light with their massive forms. Kane stood at the front, staring up at them, his pulse racing. The Rizari warlord, Vashkarex, had spoken true. The cartel wasn't just here for revenge. They were here to destroy everything. Kane turned to the people. The settlers had gathered in the town square, weapons ready, standing tall despite the fear in their eyes. Kane's voice cut through the tension. "This is it," he said, raising his rifle. "Hold your ground. Fight for your families. Fight for your home." There was a moment of silence, then the first explosion rocked the ground. The Rizari forces had landed, and the battle for Vesper 7 had begun. The battle. The Rizari charged, their weapons blazing with alien energy. The settlers returned fire, their rifles cracking through the air, sending the cartel soldiers to the ground. But the Rizari were well equipped, their armor was thick, their firepower overwhelming. Still, the people of Vesper 7 fought with fury. They were outgunned and outmatched, but they weren't giving up. Kane fought alongside them, moving like a ghost through the chaos. He was everywhere at once, shooting, leading, directing fire, making sure the settlers stayed in position, holding the line. Marcus fought beside him, using traps and explosives to slow the Rizari advance. The town square had become a war zone. Fire and smoke filled the air, but the settlers weren't backing down. Then Kane spotted something, a Rizari warship making its descent toward the colony. It was too close, too dangerous. He couldn't let it land. Kane turned to Marcus. "We need to take that ship down now." Without waiting for a response, he grabbed a grenade launcher from one of the fallen soldiers and ran toward the warship's landing zone. The final shot. The warship opened fire, its plasma cannons ripping through the air. Kane ran, dodging blasts, his heart pounding in his chest. He dove behind a barrel, then took aim. He steadied his breath, locked his sights on the ship's exposed underbelly, and fired. Boom! The grenade struck true. The warship exploded, sending a shockwave that knocked Kane off his feet. He landed hard, but he didn't care. The Rizari soldiers around him faltered, their morale broken. The settlers had just dealt a crushing blow to their forces. But the battle wasn't over. The Rizari were relentless, and Vesper 7 was still under attack. The battle raged on in Vesper 7. The ground was torn up from explosions, and the air was thick with smoke. The settlers, though outnumbered and outgunned, were holding their ground. But the Rizari cartel was relentless. They kept pushing forward, determined to crush the colony. Kane didn't stop. Every minute he fought, every moment he led, the people of Vesper 7 grew stronger. They weren't just defending their homes. They were fighting for something greater. For each other. The Rizari warlord, Vashkarex, was still somewhere out there, watching, directing his forces. Kane knew that if they didn't take him out, this battle would never end. Kane grabbed a radio from one of the fallen soldiers. He spoke quickly, voice cutting through the noise of the battlefield. "Marcus, I'm going after Vashkarex. Hold the line." Marcus's voice crackled back through the static. "You're crazy, Kane. You can't take him down alone." Kane didn't hesitate. "I don't need to take him down alone. I need to stop him from getting any closer." Without waiting for a reply, Kane ran. He moved fast, dodging enemy fire and weaving through the chaos. His mind was focused. The Rizari had to be stopped, once and for all. The chase. Kane moved through the wreckage of the town, heading toward the Rizari command center. The sky above was still filled with enemy ships, but the ground battle was shifting in the settlers' favor. It was just a matter of time before the cartel's forces started to break. As Kane made his way through the crumbled streets, he spotted Vashkarex and his personal guards moving toward a heavily armored transport. Kane paused, crouching low, and watched as the warlord shouted orders to his men. The cartel's leader was tall, imposing, his armored suit gleaming under the smoke-filled sky. Kane gritted his teeth. This was the moment he had been waiting for. He didn't need a plan. He needed action. The confrontation. Kane burst from cover, charging toward the warlord's position. Retribution soldiers scrambled to react, but it was too late. Kane leaped over debris, firing his rifle as he ran, dropping 2 soldiers with quick, precise shots. The Retribution guards tried to regroup, but Kane was already in their midst. He tackled one of them, knocking the alien to the ground, and ripped his blaster from his hands. Another soldier lunged at him, but Kane sidestepped and struck hard, sending the soldier flying into a pile of scrap metal. Finally, Kane reached Vashkarex. The Retribution warlord turned, surprised at the sight of the lone human. "You think you can stop me?" Vashkarex sneered, drawing his energy blade. Kane didn't answer. He dove forward, grabbing a metal pipe from the ground and swinging it with all his might. The 2 weapons collided with a loud clang, sparks flying from the impact. Vashkarex grinned, clearly enjoying the challenge. "You're brave. I'll give you that." Kane didn't have time to play games. He charged again, knocking the warlord off balance and disarming him with a quick twist. The warlord stumbled, falling to the ground. Kane pinned him with one knee, his breath heavy. The Retribution's eyes flashed with fury. "You should have stayed in the shadows, human," Vashkarex hissed. Kane grabbed the warlord by the throat, his voice a low growl. "This is the end for you. The final blow." Kane raised his rifle, aiming at the warlord's chest. The Retribution leader's eyes widened in disbelief. And then, Kane pulled the trigger. The shot rang out, echoing across the battlefield. Vashkarex's body fell lifeless to the ground. Kane stood over him for a moment, breathing heavily. He didn't feel victorious. He didn't feel anything. The battle wasn't over, but this warlord was. The battle was finally over. The Retribution cartel had been crushed, their forces scattered, their warlord defeated. Vesper 7, though battered and broken, was still standing. Kane looked around the town square, now filled with survivors, wounded but alive, holding on to the hope that they had won. But it wasn't a victory to celebrate. Not yet. Kane stood at the edge of the square, his rifle slung across his back, staring out at the burning remains of the Retribution ships. The fight had been hard, but they had held their ground. They had defended their homes, and that was something to be proud of. He was tired, bone-tired, but there was no time for rest. A new beginning. As the survivors gathered to tend to the wounded and rebuild, Marcus approached Kane. His face was covered in dirt, his clothes torn, but there was a hint of relief in his eyes. "You did it, Kane," Marcus said, clapping him on the shoulder. "You really did it." Kane gave a small, tired smile. "We did it. All of us." The 2 men stood there for a moment, looking over the damage. The townspeople were already hard at work, helping one another, fixing what they could, cleaning up the mess left by the war. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Kane's eyes fell on the young girl he had saved, standing with her family. She was holding the hand of her mother, her eyes wide with wonder. The war was over, and she was safe. Kane turned back to Marcus. "This is their world now. We gave them a chance to rebuild." Marcus nodded. "And they'll make it. They're tough." Kane didn't reply. He had done his part, but the future of Vesper 7 wasn't his to decide. It was up to the people of this colony to find their own way forward. The galaxy was still a dangerous place, and there would always be more threats, more enemies to face. But for now, for the first time in a long time, there was peace. The legacy of a human. As the day wore on, the settlers began to gather, their faces weary but filled with hope. Kane stood on a small rise, overlooking them all. A man from the colony, one of the few who had fought alongside Kane, stepped forward. "We owe you our lives, Commander," he said, his voice strong despite the fatigue. The crowd murmured in agreement, nodding, many of them still in shock over the battle they had just fought. and won. Cain looked down at them, his voice steady. You fought for each other. You saved this place. I just gave you a chance. He paused, his gaze shifting to the horizon. But now, you'll be the ones who decide what happens next. You'll be the ones who carry it on. The people of Vesper 7 cheered. They weren't just celebrating the defeat of the cartel, they were celebrating their survival, their unity. They had been through hell and back, but they had made it. They were alive. And that was enough.